So I'm part of Buildoffsite, which is a cross-industry organisation, a bit like the CPA, covers a whole range of organisations from construction clients, architects, engineers, and as well as manufacturers. And we're certainly not a trade body on behalf of the off-site construction industry, but we just believe that there is a better way of building. I'll rattle through these in terms of we need to transform construction. There was a very good construction strategy set out back in 2013. Lots of reports which you may have read, or they could be gathering dust on your bookshelves, talking about the need for change. There is an industrial strategy that Jane referred to. The Construction Leadership Council, which both Jane and I participate in, are all trying to drive change, but it's all talk. What we need to do now is work out how. So we have the ambition, and now we need to engage, educate people as to what is the art of the possible, encourage people to get involved, and really enable them to remove some of the barriers to what's holding the industry back. So there is a presumption in favour of offsite because intellectually and philosophically, government believes it has value to add, and now we have to collaborate and make it work, because it has been something of a, I would say almost like a cult industry, doing its own thing in the background rather than being mainstream. Now it's been talked about a lot more, and maybe it's gone too far the other way, that everybody's talking about it and not enough people are doing it. One of the barriers, and interestingly contrast with Jane's talk about sustainability and the green agenda, is people have been saying, oh yes, it would be nice to do, but it's a bit too expensive. What we want to try and do is debunk the fact that an off-site, better quality construction is actually going to be more expensive. So what exactly are the basic principles behind off-site? So the idea being that you remove activity from an environment where it's difficult to control and do well. Laying bricks when you're out on the new Northumbrian coastline when it's blowing a force 5 and it's raining is almost impossible. But doing it inside a factory when the same weather conditions are outside is very easily doable. So let's take stuff where it's difficult to control and put it where it is easy to control. Let's put it inside a factory where you do increase the overhead, but you do get a much more repeatable process. One of the key issues, or the two key issues as far as I'm concerned, is that productivity in a factory is at least double, probably triple or even more in terms of useful man hours out of a factory than it is on a construction site. People waiting for materials, waiting for drawings, waiting for decisions, as well as rework as a result of poor weather or whatever. Equally, in a factory, generally, if you're a manufacturer and you throw away more than 1% of your product, you're bankrupt pretty quickly. On a construction site, it's typically 15 to 25%, and 20% is the industry benchmark. So you're talking about 20 times more wasteful in terms of materials, and about 3 times more wasteful in terms of human capital and wasted effort, not to mention the fact that salaries on site for, if anybody's ever tried to get an electrician to come out to their own site, you'll know that electricians are reasonably well paid, and certainly if you're in charge of Crossrail, trying to get an electrician without paying a king's ransom or a Man City striker's salary is quite tricky. So off-site is a spectrum, and this is a word I'll keep coming back to. It's not all about volumetric modules. Please, if you think that off-site is just about craning in boxes, there is more. Actually, a house brick is an off-site solution because it's made in a factory and it's brought to site. It's just a smaller one. The only truly on-site construction is actually adobe brick, where you dig out the mud from your garden, bake it in the sun in a brick and turn it into a mud hut, and I think we've come on from that. But there are things in the middle in terms of panelised solutions and others. Off-site works well where there is something that's repeatable. It doesn't mean that everything has to be identical. What it does mean is there needs to be some recurring theme. A bit like when you're designing, if you're specifying a laptop, you can choose different memory, different hard drive, different screens, different colours, but basically the chassis is the same. So we need some form of repeatable element. The same thinking also applies in infrastructure. It's not just about buildings. And I firmly believe that almost every project needs to blend some on-site and off-site solutions. But the whole idea is that you can't treat off-site thinking as an afterthought, and that's one of the reasons that it's been held back, is because people say, right, I've drawn up my project, I've worked with Zaha Hadid and she's done a lovely sweeping curve, let's build that in a factory. You've got to have the factory thinking before you start. That doesn't mean you're going to be constrained and unable to be creative and create a good aesthetic. It just means you have a different set of rules to start with. So coming back to my spectrum theme again, So offsite is not a binary choice. It's not a case of either traditional or offsite. It's not bespoke or standardized. People keep, a few years ago in particular, architects would talk to me about cookie cutter. I don't want to build cookie cutter ugly boxes. I want to build something creative, and it is possible. There are some great architectural examples of offsite solutions. Some people, when they're looking for offsite solutions, they think, if I see a factory that's got robots in it, it must be high tech. You can, Elon Musk, I think it was a late part of last year, said, I've made the mistake that I underrated humans as part of the production process. Humans can find a way to spot the flaws in any design. So actually a manual solution is a great way to start with an offsite solution. Traditional is supposedly cheaper currently, and there are some. It is cheaper at the moment because when we build in offsite, we tend to build a whole series of prototypes. We don't build repeatably and learn from the first off and build them more repeatably. So what we need to do is to get the idea of a production line of similar products coming off, so that we learn, and in the same way as developing any new skill, we get better at that individual item. There's also a sense that offsite is very rigid in terms of its design, but it needn't be. Equally, it's not binary between whether an on-site delivery is risky in terms of program and cost, and an offsite is more certain. But again, all of these things come into play when you're deciding. So it's not a case of traditional is bad, offsite is good. There will be a bell curve of where different technologies are applicable. I think at the moment we're very much skewed towards the traditional side. It should be that we can shift the balance, provided the offsite manufacturing world gets more capable. I don't think it'll ever be 100% offsite, and I wouldn't want to see that, because we need that creativity and that flexibility. But we should be shifting that curve at least slightly towards. So some people think that at the moment there's an awful lot of hype about offsite, or a lot of talk about offsite. Is it a silver bullet? Some people think maybe it's flavour of the month, and if I ignore it long enough, it'll go away again and we can go back to bricks and blocks. I happen to think that it's not flavour of the month. It is the way forward to address skills shortages. That's gone all black. So is it also overhyped? Well, it may not be the best thing since sliced bread, which is what that image was supposed to show. But at least there is certainly value. But don't feel that you need to choose offsite. Choose offsite for the right reason, not because somebody tells you it is. It's also, as an industry, we haven't been very good in terms of helping people through the journey. There are so many acronyms about design for manufacturing assembly, offsite mechanical and electrical work, light gauge steel frame. We're very good at throwing letters about. And in the same way as automotive and computers use terminology about common rail diesels or CMOS chips in laptops, actually, from a user's perspective or a client's perspective, I don't care what's in the box. I just want it to do what I want it to do. I want a house that is nice and warm and uses green materials. I want a house which I feel safe in, because it's well fire protected. It gives me the aesthetic I'm looking for, and it doesn't cost me an arm and a leg. So we need to start thinking about outcomes rather than what goes in under the box. And I think that's where the offsite sector has got to be better in terms of making its case. So. Things that are happening in the industry, which is really the question that Peter originally asked. Offsite volumetric boxes have not produced many homes to date, but in the pipeline, slightly more in terms of timber frame and panelised solutions. You're talking about hundreds of volumetric residential properties. You're talking about tens of thousands of panelised solutions, but in terms of the pipeline, this presumption in favour of offsite has encouraged people to invest in some pretty large-scale factories. You may have heard of the Legal & General factory up in near Leeds. There's another factory in Derby by a company called Top Hat, Ilka Homes, and there is significant investment across the UK in additional capacity in order to address the skills and housing shortages. But it is only going to be making a dent in the current delivery of homes, but within 5 years there is potential, credible potential, to build 150,000 homes using offsite technology, provided we continue to deliver the right product at the right time. The schools programme is another area where repeatable buildings, standardised school classroom sizes, but equally dressed in different ways depending on the local architecture and the local planning requirements. £10 billion worth of investment that's going into schools, and government sees the idea of creating a platform as a great way of industrialising the process and giving a better result. And then major infrastructure projects like HS2, Heathrow and the prison service are all using the ideas of let's do more off-site, because particularly for when you're working in secure environments like prisons, secure environments like airside at Heathrow, and on railway lines which are dangerous places to be working, what we want to do is to minimise the number of people from a safety and security perspective. So coming back to that overused spectrum again, investment has been in three kind of tiers. Major investments, large scale, talking tens of millions of pounds in factories, up to £100 million in a factory. Legal in general, hundreds of thousands of square feet. They measure the factory size in numbers of football pitches rather than numbers of square feet. There are some existing manufacturers who have 20 or 30 years of capability and experience, who have always been constrained in their growth because the market demand has not been stable enough, but now the demand is growing and they're scaling up. And there are also some entrepreneurial startups who've got some great ideas and really want to do a great job producing low-cost, affordable homes or an innovative home. And our role in Buildoffsite is to help them on that journey so that they don't slip on the same banana skins that predecessors have done. The most important thing is to create credible capability. The last thing we want is the off-site industry ruined my housing development, or I'm living in a damp home, or I'm living in some form of nightmare as a result of off-site solutions. It is much easier to engineer a factory-built solution than it is a traditional one, but we have some paradigms to overcome, so we've got to do that. And it's down through collaboration. You need the voice of the client, as in what is it you're really looking for, rather than I need off-site, but I don't quite know why. So here's an image that I like to use. People think it's all about the factory. If I go and have a look at the factory, it's going to be fine. And it's like having a Rolls-Royce engine in an old-fashioned car, or a Ferrari engine in an old-fashioned car. It doesn't help. That does not look safe to drive. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I wouldn't want to drive that on the M25. So having a really good-looking factory is only part of the story. We need to be clear on the client requirements. We need to come up with new ways of procuring. We need to get the designers involved early so that they design for a solution that is deliverable. And we have structure. We get quantity surveyors. I used to have big fights with quantity surveyors because they know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So I probably upset half the audience today. But now quantity surveyors are getting with the idea that actually an engineered solution can perform better than a bill of quantities. So manufacturing logistics, the groundwork, integrating the kind of, that's near enough, make half a brick of your traditional ground worker is very different from what's required for a precision manufactured home. And also we should be thinking about the through life cost. How do we upgrade it? How do we allow people to change the heating system when we get new green technologies, to bolt in and bolt out and upgrade rather than knocking down a building and start again? So I'll very quickly whiz through this. Buildoffsite wants to make sure that everybody engaged in the construction process has a voice and an influence on the way the industry goes. Clients, the supply chain, government has a big role to play and has set this direction in terms of direction of travel, but there are also the consultants, the expertise in terms of manufacturing expertise, digital models, etc. And what we try and do is work with the other agencies like the CITB to make sure we develop the skills program going forward. Also, crucial, investors have a real role to play in terms of driving behaviour. Large-scale investors in the construction sector can drive that behaviour provided they have a clear set of requirements and make sure that the investment goes in the right direction, rather than we hopscotch from one solution to the next and we get back into that serial prototype. So where next? What we need to do is to make sure that we engage and enlighten clients so that they can be very demanding. We need to make sure that we clarify what outcomes you want rather than what inputs go in. You know, it's not a case of I need off-site, but what I want is a faster build, a more reliable build, better thermal performance. And then we've got to make sure that across the value chain that we're all aligned in terms of what the outcomes are. And we challenge the supply chain. I'm very rude about the off-site manufacturers, that quite a number are just chippies in a shed. We've taken the same mediocre practices of the construction sector and put a roof on them and duplicated them. A lot of the manufacturers that used to work in that more traditional way have now gone out of business and are being replaced by people who are investing in proper levels of capability to produce a well-engineered solution. And finally, we need to repeat and improve. There is no point in doing one-off projects in an off-site way. What we need to do is to incrementally improve every time we build the off-site solutions. Thank you very much.